The retirement party was being held at the Grandview Estate, a historic mansion overlooking the lake, with marble floors and crystal chandeliers that caught the afternoon sunlight. 80 guests filled the ballroom, celebrating my father's 35 years as a civil engineer. I stood near the back holding a glass of champagne I hadn't touched, wearing a navy dress I'd bought 2 years ago. Simple. Unremarkable. Exactly how my family liked to see me. My Uncle Robert was at the microphone, giving a speech about Dad's accomplishments. Uncle Robert loved speeches. Loved being the center of attention. Loved reminding everyone that he was the successful brother. The one who'd made it big in commercial real estate while Dad had chosen the more modest path of public service. And of course, Uncle Robert was saying, his voice booming across the ballroom, we couldn't have put together such a wonderful celebration without everyone's generous contributions. I felt my stomach tighten. I knew what was coming. Each of the family members contributed $5,000 to make this day special, Uncle Robert continued. My wife and I, Tom and Patricia, Margaret and John, everyone pitched in to give my brother the send-off he deserves. He paused, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Well, almost everyone, he said. His tone shifted, became pointed. Some people couldn't quite manage to contribute. But that's okay. We understand that not everyone is in a position to help financially. 80 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. My cousin Margaret whispered something to her husband. My Aunt Patricia shook her head sympathetically. Several people who didn't know me well looked confused, wondering who the poor relative was who couldn't afford to chip in. I stood there silent, my face neutral. I didn't defend myself. Didn't explain. Just took a small sip of my champagne and waited. Uncle Robert smiled, that condescending smile I'd seen 1,000 times. But it's the thought that counts, right? I'm sure Sarah would have helped if she could have. He moved on with his speech, talking about Dad's career highlights. The room's attention shifted back to him, but I could still feel the occasional glances. The judgment. The pity. My younger cousin Claire approached me during the applause. She was 23, fresh out of college, still idealistic enough to be uncomfortable with family drama. Sarah, I'm sure Uncle Robert didn't mean anything by that, she whispered. He's just, you know how he is. I know exactly how he is, I said quietly. Were you not able to contribute? Claire asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, that's none of my business. Don't worry about it, I said. The speeches continued. My aunt shared funny stories. My brother gave an emotional toast. Dad looked genuinely touched, standing at the head table with my mother, both of them in their mid-60s, ready for the next chapter of their lives. Finally, it was time for Dad to speak. He approached the microphone, his eyes slightly misty. Thank you all for being here, he began. 35 years is a long time. I've designed bridges, highways, public buildings. I've worked with incredible teams and seen projects that seemed impossible become reality. He paused, looking around the room. But the real accomplishment isn't the structures I've built. It's the family I've raised and the relationships I've maintained. You're all here today, and that means more to me than any engineering award ever could. People applauded. Dad smiled and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Before we move on to dinner, he said, I wanted to thank everyone who helped organize this event. Robert mentioned the contributions and I'm truly grateful. But I just received this from the venue management, and I think I need to read it. He opened the envelope and pulled out a formal invoice. His smile faltered as he read. The room went quiet, sensing something was about to happen. This is interesting, Dad said slowly. His eyes lifted to scan the crowd, searching for someone. They landed on me. Sarah. I set down my champagne glass. Yes, Dad. Can you come up here, please? Every head in the room turned to watch me walk to the front. I could hear the whispers starting, confused, curious, some already defensive. I reached Dad's side and he held up the invoice so I could see it. The Grandview Estate Palmer Retirement Celebration, the header read. Below that, in bold letters, total cost, $125,000. Paid in full by Sarah Palmer Enterprises. Dad looked at me, his expression unreadable. You paid for this entire party? Yes, I said simply. $125,000? Yes. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floors. Uncle Robert pushed forward from his table. That's impossible. Sarah doesn't have that kind of money. He works at, what is it you do again? Something with computers. I run a software development company, I said calmly. Palmer Enterprises. We specialize in custom business solutions for mid-sized companies. We did about $8 million in revenue last year. Uncle Robert's face went pale. $8 million. In revenue, I clarified. Our profit margin is approximately 32%, but that fluctuates depending on project costs. My Aunt Patricia stood up. But you live in that small apartment. You drive that old car. I live in a small apartment because I don't need much space, I said. I drive a 10-year-old sedan because it's reliable and I don't care about cars. I invest my money in things that matter, like my business, my employees, and apparently my father's retirement party. Dad was still staring at the invoice. Sarah, how did you? I booked the venue 4 months ago, I said. When Mom mentioned you wanted a big celebration. I paid the deposit, worked with the event coordinator on all the details. The menu, the flowers, the photographer, everything. Uncle Robert thinks he organized this, but all he did was send out invitations and collect money from people who wanted to contribute. I turned to look at Uncle Robert. Money that I assume you were planning to use for what exactly? Since I'd already paid for everything. Uncle Robert's mouth opened and closed. His wife grabbed his arm, her expression horrified. I was going to use it for a gift, he said weakly. A nice watch or something. With $35,000 from family contributions? I asked. That's quite a watch. My brother, David, stood up from his table. Wait, so everyone who contributed $5,000, that money didn't go toward the party? The party was already paid for, I confirmed. I sent Uncle Robert the venue confirmation 3 months ago. He must have decided not to mention that detail when he started collecting contributions. The room erupted in noise. People were talking over each other, demanding answers from Uncle Robert, looking at me with new eyes. Dad held up his hand for silence. Everyone please. Let's take a moment here. The crowd settled into an uncomfortable quiet. Sarah, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. Why didn't you tell anyone you were paying for this? Because it was a gift, I said simply. And because I knew that if I told the family, someone would try to take over or change things or make it about them instead of about you. But Uncle Robert said you were too broke to contribute, Claire called out from the back. He made it sound like you couldn't afford to help. I know what he said, I replied. I was standing right there. And you just let him say it? My mother asked. She'd been silent until now, tears streaming down her face. What was I supposed to do, Mom? Make a scene? Defend myself in front of 80 people? Announce that I'd actually paid for everything? I shook my head. I paid for this party because I loved Dad and I wanted him to have a perfect retirement celebration. Not because I wanted recognition or praise. Uncle Robert had recovered enough to try to regain control of the situation. Well, this is all very nice, but I think Sarah is exaggerating. $8 million in revenue doesn't mean. My company has 42 employees, I interrupted. We have offices in 3 cities. Our biggest client is Henderson Manufacturing. Maybe you've heard of them? We built their entire inventory management system. The contract was worth $2.3 million. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Held it up so everyone could see the balance. My personal checking account has $750,000 in it right now, I said. My business accounts hold another $3 million. I have investment portfolios worth approximately $11 million. My net worth is around $19 million, give or take depending on the market. The gasps were audible now. My cousin Margaret looked like she might faint. Uncle Robert had gone from pale to bright red. But we thought. My Aunt Patricia started, then stopped. We all thought you were struggling. Why would you think that? I asked. Because I don't brag about money? Because I don't drive a luxury car or wear designer clothes? Because I chose to build something meaningful instead of showing off? You never said anything, David said. He sounded hurt. You never told us about your company, about how successful you were. I tried to, I said quietly. 5 years ago when I started Palmer Enterprises, I invited everyone to the launch party. 3 people showed up, Mom, Dad, and Claire. The rest of you were too busy. Claire nodded confirmation. I remember that. It was at that hotel downtown. Sarah gave a whole presentation about her business model. 3 years ago when we landed the Henderson contract, I called to share the news, I continued. Uncle Robert, you said, "That's nice," and spent 20 minutes talking about your new BMW. Aunt Patricia, you asked when I was going to get a real job, with benefits. My aunt looked at the floor. So I stopped sharing, I said. I stopped trying to make you understand what I was building. I focused on my work, on my employees, on growing something I was proud of. And I was fine with you all thinking whatever you wanted to think about me. Until tonight, Dad said softly. When Robert publicly humiliated you. He didn't humiliate me, I said. He humiliated himself. I was just waiting for the right moment to clarify things. Dad set down the invoice and pulled me into a hug. I'm so sorry, he whispered. I should have paid more attention. I should have asked more questions. It's okay, Dad, I said. This party is for you. Let's not let Uncle Robert ruin it. But the party was already transformed. As dinner was served, filet mignon and Chilean sea bass, which I'd selected and paid for, the conversation at every table was about my revelation. People kept approaching me. Some to apologize. Some to ask about my business. Some just to stare like I'd grown a second head. My cousin Tom approached during dessert. Sarah, I'm one of the people who contributed $5,000. If the party was already paid for, what happened to that money? That's an excellent question, I said, looking pointedly at Uncle Robert's table. Tom followed my gaze. Are you saying Uncle Robert kept it? I'm saying he collected $35,000 from 7 family members for a party that cost them nothing, I said. What he did with that money is between him and his conscience. Tom's face darkened. He walked directly to Uncle Robert's table, David and several other cousins following. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I watched Uncle Robert's face go through several expressions, defensive, angry, then resigned. His wife was crying. The cousins were clearly demanding answers. Mom appeared at my side. Did you know he was collecting money? I found out 2 weeks ago, I said. One of the cousins mentioned their contribution in passing. I checked with the venue, confirmed they hadn't received any additional payments, and realized what Uncle Robert was doing. Why didn't you say something? Because I wanted to see how far he'd go, I admitted. I wanted to see if he'd actually stand up in front of everyone and lie about me being too broke to contribute, knowing the whole time that he'd stolen from his own family. Mom paused. That's actually pretty clever. I learned from the best, I said. Dad always said that if you give people enough rope, they'll show you who they really are. Dad joined us, looking exhausted but somehow lighter. Robert just confessed that he used the contribution money to pay off his credit cards. Apparently, his real estate business isn't doing as well as he's been claiming. Shocking, I said dryly. He wants to apologize to you, Dad said. I don't need his apology, I said. He didn't steal from me. He stole from Tom, David, Patricia, Margaret, and everyone else who trusted him. Still, Dad insisted. Come with me. We walked to Uncle Robert's table. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His wife wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Sarah, Uncle Robert said. His voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. What I said about you, what I did, it was wrong. I was jealous and stupid and You were trying to make yourself feel bigger by making me feel smaller, I interrupted. And it backfired spectacularly. Yes, he admitted. It did. You're going to pay back everyone you took money from, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes. It'll take me some time, but yes. And you're going to apologize to Dad for using his retirement as an opportunity to steal from family. I already did, Uncle Robert said, looking at Dad. I'm so sorry, Richard. You deserved better. Dad nodded stiffly. You did this to yourself, Robert. Nobody else. As we walked away, Mom linked her arm through mine. I'm proud of you, she said. Not because of the money or the business. I'm proud of how you handled yourself tonight. With grace and strength. Thanks, Mom. But Sarah. She squeezed my arm. Please don't shut us out anymore. I want to know about your life. Really know about it. The successes, the challenges, all of it. I'd like that, I said honestly. The party continued late into the evening. The photographer I'd hired and paid for captured hundreds of moments. The band, which I'd booked, played Dad's favorite songs. The guests ate the elaborate dinner and drank the premium wine and danced on the marble floors. And through it all, people kept approaching me differently now. Not with pity or condescension but with respect. With curiosity. With genuine interest. Claire found me on the terrace around midnight looking out at the lake. "That was amazing," she said. "What you did in there." "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just told the truth." "You let Uncle Robert make a fool of himself in front of everyone," Claire said. "You could have stopped him earlier but you waited for the perfect moment. That's not nothing." "Maybe," I admitted. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. "Did you really not care that he was calling you broke in front of everyone?" I thought about it. "I cared," I said honestly. "It hurt. But I also knew that the truth would come out eventually. And I knew that when it did, it would mean more than any defense I could have offered in the moment." "Teach me," Claire said suddenly. "About business, about building something. I'm working an entry-level job and I feel like I'm going nowhere. But you built a $90 million empire. I want to learn how." I smiled. "Come by my office next week. I'll show you everything." As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Dad pulled me aside one final time. "This whole evening, the venue, the food, the entertainment, you planned all of this?" "Every detail," I confirmed. "And you let Robert take credit because?" "Because I didn't need credit," I said. "I did this for you, not for recognition. But when he decided to publicly humiliate me, I figured it was time to set the record straight." Dad laughed. A real genuine laugh. "You're more like me than I realized. Patient. Willing to let others underestimate you." "I learned from the best," I said. "Your mother and I want to know everything," Dad said. "About your business, your life, your plans. We've been absent and that's on us. But if you'll let us, we'd like to be more involved." "I'd like that too," I said. As I drove home that night in my 10-year-old sedan, I thought about the look on Uncle Robert's face when Dad read that invoice. About the shocked silence that had filled the ballroom. About the way my family had looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. I'd spent $125,000 on that party. Not to show off. Not to prove anything. Just to give my father the retirement celebration he deserved. The fact that it also exposed Uncle Robert's lies and forced my family to see me differently? That was just a bonus. Sometimes the best way to deal with people who underestimate you isn't to argue or defend yourself. It's to quietly pay for everything, let them expose themselves and then watch their faces when the truth comes out. And that moment, that beautiful silent moment when 80 people realized they'd been completely wrong about who I was, that was worth every penny.